Picture a Europe where the Russian bear was broken not by winter but by Napoleon himself. A Europe where Moscow burned, the Tsar knelt, and the Eagle of France flew from Lisbon to the Ural Mountains. That is the world we are about to build, sentence by sentence, from a single decision made on a smoke-choked field 70 miles outside Moscow. But before we rewrite history, we need to understand the history that actually happened. Because every great what-if begins with real facts. In June of 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte crossed the Niemen River with the largest army Europe had ever seen. Over 600,000 men drawn from France and its allied and conquered territories. His goal was simple on paper: force Tsar Alexander I back into the continental system. The economic blockade designed to strangle Britain by closing every European port to British trade. Russia had quietly reopened trade with Britain, and Napoleon saw this as a betrayal of the peace they had signed years earlier at Tilsit. He believed one swift, decisive campaign would bring Alexander to the negotiating table within weeks, the same way he had humbled Austria and Prussia before. Instead, Russia refused to fight the war Napoleon wanted. Rather than meeting the Grand Armée in one grand battle, Russian generals retreated for hundreds of miles, burning crops, villages, and supplies behind them. A scorched earth strategy that starved Napoleon's army before a single major battle was even fought. By the time the two armies finally collided at Borodino on September the 7th, Napoleon's forces had already shrunk dramatically from disease, desertion, and the sheer exhaustion of marching across a landscape offering nothing to eat. Borodino became the bloodiest single day of the entire Napoleonic Wars, with something close to 70,000 casualties in less than 12 hours. And here is the real historical point of divergence, the moment where our alternate timeline splits from reality. In the actual battle, Napoleon held back his most elite reserve, the Imperial Guard, refusing to commit them even as his marshals begged him to finish off the reeling Russian army. Historians still debate why. Some say he feared losing his last reserve so far from home. Others say he simply hesitated at the one moment history needed him not to. Now imagine a different Napoleon on that field. One who trusts his instincts instead of his caution. In this timeline, as the Russian center begins to collapse in the early afternoon, Napoleon gives the order every marshal was waiting for. The Imperial Guard marches forward into the gap, and the already broken Russian army does not simply retreat in order, it disintegrates. General Kutuzov's forces, already bled white, cannot reform a defensive line. Instead of a costly but inconclusive victory, Borodino becomes a true catastrophe for Russia. The kind of single-day destruction that erases an army's ability to fight again that year. The immediate aftermath unfolds fast. Without an intact Russian army standing between Napoleon and Moscow, French cavalry pours across the countryside, meeting almost no resistance. Moscow falls even faster than it did in real history, and this time there is no organized Russian force nearby to threaten Napoleon's rear or his supply lines. In the real timeline, the city still burned, likely set alight by retreating Russians, rather than let it shelter the invaders, and Napoleon sat in the ashes for over a month, waiting for a peace offer that never came. In our alternate timeline, without an army left to protect, Tsar Alexander faces a far grimmer calculation. His capital is not St. Petersburg, but his military is gone, his nobility is panicking, and his allies in Prussia and Austria, already reluctant partners, see no reason to keep resisting a war that looks unwinnable. Under this pressure, Alexander does something historically plausible but devastating for Russia's future. He sues for peace, not from strength, but from desperation. Napoleon, sensing the chance to finally humble the one power that had defied him longest, dictates terms far harsher than Tilsit ever imposed. Russia is forced to fully enforce the continental system, cede territory in the west, including parts of what is now Poland and the Baltic region, pay massive war reparations, and accept French garrisons on Russian soil to guarantee compliance. For the first time since the French Revolution began reshaping Europe, nearly the entire continent, from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the edges of Russia's western provinces, answers directly or indirectly to Paris. This is where most versions of this story would end triumphantly, with Napoleon as the undisputed master of Europe. But history rarely rewards total victory the way we expect it to. And here comes our first major turn. A Napoleonic Europe stretching from Spain to Russia is not a symbol of unstoppable strength. It is an enormous, unstable, and expensive machine that requires constant maintenance. Occupying Russian territory means garrisoning thousands of miles of hostile land where local nobles resent French officers billeted in their manor houses, and peasants resent taxes flowing toward France instead of St. Petersburg. The same scorched earth tactics that crippled Napoleon's invasion do not disappear just because a treaty was signed. Partisan resistance, the same kind of irregular guerrilla warfare that had already been bleeding France dry in Spain for years, begins to spread quietly through the Russian countryside. This brings us to the second turn in our alternate history, and it is the one most people miss when they imagine Napoleon winning in Russia. Spain never goes away. In the real timeline, the Peninsular War was already consuming French resources long before the Russian campaign. And in our alternate history, it does not simply pause because Napoleon achieved a stunning victory further east. British forces under Wellington continue pressing through Spain and Portugal, and years of guerrilla resistance keep hundreds of thousands of French troops pinned down in a war that produces no decisive victories, only slow, grinding attrition. Napoleon may have humbled the Tsar, but the empire is now fighting expensive, simultaneous wars on two opposite ends of the continent, and simply does not have enough soldiers, money, or loyal administrators to hold everything at once. Meanwhile, back in the newly subdued Russian territories, the harsh peace terms begin to backfire almost immediately. Russian nobility, humiliated by foreign garrisons and crushing reparations, quietly began supporting resistance movements instead of cooperating with them. Alexander I, forced into peace publicly, works behind the scenes to rebuild his military and rally support from Prussia, Austria, and eventually Britain, all of whom have their own reasons to fear a French empire that now stretches across the entire continent. Napoleon's victory at Borodino did not end the resistance to his empire. It simply delayed it, and gave his enemies time to grow desperate enough to unite more tightly than before. Here is the third turn, and perhaps the most important one for understanding why even a total military triumph in Russia likely would not have secured Napoleon's empire long-term. The continental system, the very policy that started this entire war, becomes even harder to enforce across a larger territory. Blocking British trade requires cooperation from every port and every customs official across an enormous stretch of coastline, from Spanish harbors to Baltic ones, and smuggling flourishes wherever enforcement is weak. The economic pain of the blockade falls hardest not on Britain, which simply finds new markets in its growing overseas empire, but on European merchants, manufacturers, and ordinary families who lose access to goods and income. Economic resentment across Napoleon's expanded empire grows in exactly the regions he now controls directly, including the newly conquered Russian territories, planting the seeds of rebellion in soil that should have been the crown jewel of his victory. Within a few years in this alternate timeline, the pattern becomes familiar to anyone who studies the rise and fall of empires. A coalition, quietly encouraged by Britain's money and diplomacy, begins to form again, this time uniting Prussia, Austria, and a rebuilding Russian military eager for revenge rather than resigned to defeat. Napoleon, forced to fight in Spain, managed occupied Russia, and now defend against a new coalition rising in Central Europe, faces the exact strategic nightmare every military historian points to as unsustainable. A 2 or even 3-front war with no clear path to a lasting peace on any of them. His victory at Borodino, rather than securing his empire, may have simply postponed its collapse by a handful of years, while making that eventual collapse even more chaotic, spreading fighting across a wider stretch of the continent than the real Napoleonic Wars ever saw. There is a deeper irony sitting underneath this entire alternate timeline, one that connects directly back to real history. Napoleon's actual downfall did not come from losing a single decisive battle. It came from trying to hold together an empire that had grown larger than any single system of communication, taxation, or military logistics of that era could realistically manage. Even in a timeline where he crushes the Russian army at Borodino and forces Alexander to his knees, the fundamental math of the problem does not change. More territory means more borders to defend, more populations to control, more resources diverted away from the battlefield and into occupation, and more opportunities for rivals to wait patiently for the empire to overextend itself. Conquering Russia might have delayed the story of Napoleon's fall, but the deeper forces pulling his empire apart, geography, logistics, nationalism, and the sheer difficulty of ruling from a single distant capital, were already in motion long before he ever crossed the Mima River. This is the real insight hiding inside this hypothetical, the one historians return to again and again when they study empires that expand faster than they can be governed. Winning a war and winning a lasting peace are two entirely different achievements, and history is full of powerful conquerors who mastered the first while completely failing at the second. Alexander the Great's empire fractured within a generation of his death. Rome's expansion eventually created more frontier than any single emperor could defend at once. Even in our alternate world, where Napoleon achieves the crushing victory that eluded him in real life, the underlying weaknesses of an empire built through conquest, rather than genuine loyalty, do not disappear. They simply wait a little longer to resurface. So maybe the real question is not whether Napoleon could have conquered Russia. In the right set of circumstances, with the right decision made at the right hour on a single bloody field, he very well might have. The real question is whether any empire built that way, stretched across a continent through fear, occupation, and economic control rather than genuine shared interest, was ever built to last in the first place. Perhaps some victories are simply too large to hold on to. And perhaps history's most dangerous moment is not the battle you almost lose, but the battle you almost win.